Now let's talk about some other thing, that is outside the eastern southern part of the continent. This is, of course, the death of five people that got into a boat, or submersible, as it is called, trying to see the Titanic carcass. It has made news headlines across the world, but I'm asking because I want us to compare it with the energy that was given to the migrant boat that was carrying
Yeah.
750 people from, I think, Libya,
Mhm.
moving into the Mediterranean Sea, that it also sunk. More than 500 people are said to have died in that incident. That this is barely about 2 weeks ago, about a week or 2 weeks ago, and it didn't make as much headlines as this particular situation. So, Darren, I want your thoughts on why that is.
Well, I think we need to. I'll give the issue of Africans trying to migrate into Europe and other places as a recurrent thing. I mean, it is happening. Those will not be the last. I am very certain there will be another attempt to. Another attempt by immigrants to cross into Europe. So it's a recurring thing. And for me, it's just another story yet to happen, but what are we doing to stop that from happening? But on the other side, when you look at Titanic and five people, finding themselves into a submissive vessel that disappears. Who are these people? There's one of the richest people in UK. There's another one of the richest people from Pakistan. There are people of status. There are people who had money, and also given the fact that where they were going is a historical site. I mean, this is something that has been known, acted into movies, and it can easily attract that kind of attention. And no one still expected this to happen, whereas very few people knew that there was that kind of tourism happening by Ocean Gate, and it was not in regulations. It was never certified by any body around the world. There's so many things that cause that kind of attraction to this particular story. For the African story, I'm sorry, but I'll keep saying this, that it's going to happen again. We've seen boats capsize going to Turkey, to Italy, and they've been saving them, and so many times it keeps coming back to the story. I don't know if I.
Good. It seems that we have an interruption with Darren's internet. We hope that he can reconnect and share his thoughts just before we wrap this up. But Tebogo, what are your thoughts on this as well?
For me, all of it once again paints, or rather, should be telling in terms of what the West thinks when it comes to African affairs. I mean, if for me, it's the attention. We saw the same thing happen with COVID-19, where every time a catastrophe takes place within Africa, it's not given as much attention. There's not as many resources diverted to that catastrophe. Even in terms of international news as well, it doesn't really hit the headlines as much as the catastrophes that happen in Western countries. So it's really telling, because now you'd understand that even in terms of wars, we've seen the same thing take effect when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine situation, where we've had wars in Africa that have really debilitated African people. And this is why Africans are actually trying so desperately to move from such harrowing situations and cross these water bodies, because of these particular wars that I'm speaking to, that have went on for years. But the attention that they've gotten in the time frame that they've played out has been less than what we've seen in terms of the Russia-Ukraine situation. So for me, it still really points that out, looking at that you have 500 people who are missing and who are thought dead, and you, as opposed to five. It's very funny, because the numbers are five, and then you multiply 500. So it's really very telling in terms of what the situation is globally, with relation to Africa.
Really sad. Really sad. And we can say,
Very sad.
over and over and over, how important it is that African leaders, find ways to create more value of life for the African. Darren, quickly, just before we go, we need to wrap up.
Like Tego's point, but we should also understand that I think we also need to blame ourselves as the media in Africa, plus leaders themselves. Imagine the resources you put together to go and solve an issue of Ukraine and Russia, but you cannot put together heads to kind of solve the issues that are happening on the African continent, to ensure, even putting in effort to say that how do we save our people who are drowning in these oceans, in these seas. Rather, we leave it to the West, who are the ones reporting the story, and they are the ones coming in to rescue. I have never seen a boat from an African continent rushing into the sea to say, hey, we can handle this. It's always the other side. It's always because we don't have the abilities. We don't have these submarines. We don't have these huge vessels that can cross into those oceans. Our priorities are very far from. We're trying to get ourselves into power, stick there, make sure that we are the kings and kings instead of being a president. A political leader has become a president. So our interests are selfish, and we don't think for ourselves. That's what we are doing. But we can wake up and say we are going to solve an issue in Europe. That thing still disturbs my head till now. I've never understood it. When you have issues like Sudan, where migrants are now running into Libya and now finding themselves into the ocean trying to get into Europe. So we have issues on the continent.
And I agree with you, Darren. We do certainly have issues on the continent that we have so much work that needs to be done. We need to hold our leaders accountable to prioritize the welfare of Africans. But it's also important to mention that this is in no way us, shifting away the focus. To also say that even the lives that were lost in the submersible, it's a very sad, tragic story. Whilst we're covering this, our thoughts and our prayers go to the family of those who lost their loved ones in the tragic incidents. There have been mean comments like we talked about before we came on air, but we're not going to focus on that. Our thoughts and prayers are with them, as well as with the people who unfortunately have lost their lives or have gotten missing in the Greece waters. Thank you so much, Darren and Tebogo, for joining us today.
A pleasure, guys. Have a great
see you next week.
All right. Have a great weekend.